So welcome everyone for our next session in this international conference. And we are going to start with our keynote presentation one. I would first like to introduce our revered speaker to all of you. We have Professor Som Naidu connected all the way from Melbourne, Australia. I would like to introduce our learned speaker to all the audience and all the online members who are connected here with us today. Professor Som Naidu is the former Pro-Vice Chancellor and Director of the Center for Flexible Learning at the University of South Pacific and is currently the Principal Associate of Technology, Education and Design Associates, which is a Melbourne-based educational technology consultancy service. Professor Naidu has spent most of his professional life in higher education sector in a variety of roles to do with enhancing learning and teaching in open, flexible, distance, online learning and distributed learning, and education more generally in a variety of jurisdictions. He possesses an undergraduate qualification in education from the University of Waikato in New Zealand and a graduate qualification in educational technology from Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. He's a former president of the Open and Distance Learning Association of Australia and has served as the executive editor of the Journal of Distance Education since 1997. In May 2014, the Open University of Sri Lanka awarded Dr. Naidu with a D.Litt degree in recognition of his extensive contribution to the field of open, flexible, distance, and e-learning, both regionally and internationally. And in July 2020, the Advanced Higher Education UK admitted Dr. Naidu as a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy for his commitment, contribution, and strategic leadership in the scholarship of learning and teaching globally. I have the pleasure of presenting Professor Naidu to all of you, and I request him to take his presentation and deliberate on the topic of the discussion. Thank you so much. Welcome, Professor Naidu.
Thank you, Aditya. Just give me a thumbs up if you see my PowerPoint slides and you can hear me well.
Yes.
All good?
No, you need to share it now, sir.
So you can share your screen now.
Okay, just a minute,
We were able to see your screen earlier, but if you could just start sharing.
Okay, I think I got it now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
You can see it now?
Yeah, we can see it, sir.
Better now?
Yeah.
All right.
So I think we can do the slideshow. Probably that will, because we are seeing two screens.
Oh, you're seeing two screens, huh?
Yeah. I think so. If you just need to click on the three dots, and there you'll get.
God. Is that any better?
Yes. Now it's all right.
It's better.
Yes.
It's okay?
It's all right.
Okay, so I better leave it that way. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aditya. Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you today at your auspicious occasion. As I've been listening to the introductory remarks, I think this is a very relevant event at the time, and I'm privileged to be part of a group of people who are going to be speaking to this event. Let me also acknowledge the presence of my good friend, Dr. Sharma, and also Professor Shironika Karunayaka, who is already online, I think, and of course, Dr. Kaur and Morten Paulsen, who are all colleagues, and I'm privileged to be part of that group. Now, as I was listening to the introductory remarks of the previous speakers earlier this morning, it occurred to me that many of us are in the same space and we are talking about similar sorts of things. So what I'm going to try and do is not to repeat what other people have said, but to try and focus on things that other people may not have mentioned or will not have mentioned. I've got a set of PowerPoint slides, so I'm going to whiz through those slides and try and focus attention on the things that I think will add value to what you've already been saying. As you can see, despite the title of the presentation that I sent to Aditya earlier on, I have been rethinking what I should be focusing on. And I thought that given MIER's mandate and MIER's focus, I thought it'd be interesting from my background in senior administration and management of universities to be talking about how we should be reimagining our educational systems around technology and education. By education, I mean learning and teaching, and also design, which is something that I think a lot about. And in my current capacity as an associate of a consultancy service called Technology, Education, and Design Associate. So that's going to be the focus of my talk in the next 30 minutes or so. But a starting point, as some of you have already foreshadowed, is the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our education system. In many ways, it sort of served as a tipping point for us to rethink our education systems. And one of the things that you may or may not have seen, and amongst many other studies that have been carried out, this study by JISC, which is a UK-based organization, found that by 2020, middle of 2020 and 2021, a very large number, let's not worry about the numbers or millions or billions, but very large numbers of students and teachers were caught short, and institutions had to close down across the board. Which, and I'm taking this as a jumping point for us because I think it gives us an opportunity to ask this question, which I put to you as well. Can the universities of today lead learning for tomorrow? And I'm not the only one who's asking this question. This question was asked by Australian universities, and as some of you will know, there's about 38 or 39 universities in Australia for a population of about 27 million people. And some of the questions looked like this. How prepared do you think are educational institutions for a digitally enhanced and future-focused education system? You are talking about digital education. You're talking about open education. But the question that I think we should be asking is how prepared our education system. I mean, I know Dr. Sharma, Professor Sharma earlier on talked about all kinds of technologies that are on the horizon or are already with us. But the question I think we need to struggle with is how prepared are institutions and our teaching and learning systems to handle those technologies, to incorporate those technologies. And how are contemporary universities rethinking and redesigning their institutional choreographies? I use those words selectively to meet those challenges posed by those technologies and by human resources. And more importantly, how are contemporary universities defining their places in this space? And I think MIER is very well placed to be seen as someone who is not only simply talking about these sorts of fancy weird technologies, but actually doing something about positioning itself as a leader in the incorporation of these technologies. In the Australian situation, the report that came out as a result of this investigation was a bit not so encouraging, if I can put it politely. This report by Ernst Young, way back in 2019 and 2020, even at the start of the pandemic, had suggested that Australian universities are really not up to speed. And this is talking about a fairly developed country, as you all know. And that they were saying at that time that Australian universities are anchored by physical spaces and time-bound schedule. And digital transformation is challenging the dominant model, which is what we are saying. So I think the key question for us and for you and for this conference is that the bottom line is, as I would say, is for a future-focused education system, we need to rethink the way we are organized. We need to rethink the way we're organizing our learning and teaching systems. Because if you don't change your operational models, then all the technology is going to be very hard to incorporate. And that's the point. I'm not going to worry about the technology, because that is, as you just said yourself, is obvious. But unless we change our systems, and which is hard to change because we have all kinds of regulatory bodies in every country which will tell you how we should be doing and how we shouldn't be doing things. So you might ask the question, well, why should we do that? Now, here's my take on it. Why should we be doing that? Because education is a public good. And I keep saying this, and I've said it in many places, and many of my friends would be very familiar with me going on and on about the same message, which is that without education, we can never be free. Freedom is not simply just about voting or exercising one's democratic right. Freedom is about being able to make choices. And unless we have money, and many of us don't have enough money, without education, we can't make the choices that we want to make, can't apply for the jobs that we want to apply, can't move places that we want to move to, can't buy things that we want to buy. So education is very basic need and essential to our ability to make our lives better and to make the choices that will help our lives make our lives better. So despite all the things that we have talked about and you have talked about in terms of dealing with technology, incorporating technology, and assimilating technology in your work processes, I have found that in my experience, unless institutions change their policy directions, not much is likely to happen. So you can talk all day about technology. You can talk about VR, AR, and you name it, and AI, which everybody wants to talk about, including ChatGPT and so on and so on. But unless institutions change their policies in relation to learning and teaching, unless institutions change their policies in relation to how faculty members, for example, are hired and rewarded and appointed and promoted, these things will be very hard to implement. And I make that point as a former pro vice chancellor, because these are the challenges that every institution everywhere in the world will face. So unless policy changes, it's very hard to incorporate these kinds of developments into the workplace. And policies have to do with value propositions. And I'm privileged to be talking to MIER College, because I think MIER is one of the institutions that I've seen, not just in India, but throughout the world, that is driven by some value propositions. So I think institutions have to think about what is the value proposition, and these value propositions will be reflected in their strategic plans and goals. And I think most importantly, there are two things that we think and I think are critical to those value propositions. One is about open education, and I know other people like Sharonika and also people following her will be talking about open education, so I'm not going to be too detailed about that. But open education has to do with open access for surely, and open learning strategies, and open scholarship, within which I encapsulate open educational resources. And again, I'm not going to dwell on that. Open access has to do with not just equal access, but equity, which means that being able to access educational opportunities from a position of disadvantage. And open learning, of course, we're all familiar with. Open universities have facilitated that in terms of being able to study anywhere, anytime, in any place. But open scholarship is the other thing. We bang on and on. We talk about open educational resources ad nauseum, and argue that open educational resources are going to make lives cheaper and easier. But open educational resources is a much bigger concept and has to do with intellectual property, how intellectual property, for example, in terms of readings, articles, journal articles, and books and book chapters are shared amongst the educational community. Now, unless the way we have treated intellectual property changes, we cannot really engage in open scholarship. Every educator needs to appreciate the fact that educational resources, intellectual property, needs to be shared amongst people openly and freely. Unless that is the case, we are always going to have intellectual property and educational resources in the hands of few and the wealthier and the richer. And in the developing world and the developing societies will be always poorer for it. This is the reason for the practice and the adoption of open scholarship. The other value proposition has to do around flexibility. Now, flexibility is often seen as a concept that is related to how one is able to study anytime, anywhere, any place. But you see, my take on flexibility is much bigger. Think of the institution, how flexible is the institution. Number one, I've got 8 dimensions, that captures the variety of dimensions of flexibility. Oftentimes, we talk about flexibility in terms of as I was saying, time, place, and place of study. But flexibility has to do with the way we design our learning experiences. If our learning experiences are based on the textbook and on the classroom, then it's not a very flexible learning experience, isn't it? How learners interact with content, for example. You think about how do they in your institution, how learners interact with teachers, how learners interact with learners, how learners engage with the learning environment, be it online or hybrid or face-to-face, engage with assessment activities. Earlier speakers were talking about assessment, but regardless of our enhanced understanding of these sorts of things, if you look around, institutions throughout the world, not just in India or at my college, are still very archaic in their approach to assessment and their approach to feedback. How is feedback provided to learners and their engagement and learners' engagement with the institution? So if you want to think about flexibility, you take a whole institution-wide approach. And unless the institution, I'm taking the institution from the governing council of the institution to the learning and teaching activities that are taking place on a daily basis, unless you rethink these sorts of issues, you are going to be only tinkering at the edges and sort of flapping your wings in the air, if you like, and not really making any change. Now, I'm very aware of the fact that there are many institutions, and my included, is that you're probably saying, yes, we do a lot of those things. We are practicing a lot of those things. But see, my take on this is that yes, many institutions are doing a lot of those things that I've just sort of rattled on. about. But what is missing is an institutional-wide approach. I've yet to see a whole institution, let alone a whole institution, a whole program, a whole college, or a whole faculty, taking an open, flexible approach in the way I'm describing. So moving those boutique and those small-scale operations to the mainstream is the biggest challenge. But I'm the first one to admit that don't throw the baby out the bathwater. The lecture and the lecture room doesn't need to be out of the equation. The lecture is still a good lecture, is still a very powerful means of communication, but lectures don't have to be given at a time that is not convenient for people to access it. So here's my second most important point, that openness and flexibility does not mean the demise of the campus-based experience. I'm not throwing the campus out of the equation. The campus is still very important. And another important point is that I'm not talking about modes of learning and teaching. Openness and flexibility are value propositions. They can be seen in so many different ways. A campus-based universities like JNU or any kind of or Ivy League institutions such as IITs, they too can benefit from openness and flexibility in so many different ways. Openness and flexibility is not just confined to blended learning, hybrid learning, and so on and so on. So I don't think we should be arguing about modes of learning. We should be asking about value proposition. What is the good thing to do? What is the right thing to do as far as learning and teaching is concerned? And choice of modes will differ, depending on what kind of institution you are, what's your history, what's your background. And choice of technologies will vary. And choice of technologies will vary not because you like certain technologies as opposed to others, but it depends on what your students have access to. And I'm very aware that in the developing world, AR and VR, as much as powerful as they sound, as fancy as they sound, is not possible because students don't have the tools and technologies, the connectivity is not there, the infrastructure is not there. So getting the mixture right will depend on where you are, who you are, what your learners, who your learners are, where they are, and what is the capacity of your teachers and the institution as a whole. And the presentation and mediation of content will vary based on that. One of the things that I'm guided by in my talks is that, learning and teaching is about the designing of productive learning experience. You never really, and I think Ramesh had mentioned that, you really can't teach people many things except motivate them and put them in experiences where they are able to learn by themselves. So, and I wanted to make a few points here in relation to MIER, because I know MIER's focus is education, but oftentimes we see education quite differently from the way we ought to be seen. We see teaching very much as somebody standing in front of a classroom or teaching people or telling somebody about content. We're very good at that. We have practiced that for a very long time. But when you think about it, teaching is not really, as Dr. Sharma says, teaching is not really about delivering content. The term delivery is something that I've thrown out of my vocabulary, because teaching is not about delivering anything to anyone. It's not like, delivering goods or groceries to somebody's home, or vegetables, or whatever it might be. Teaching is about putting people in productive learning environments where they can learn for themselves, where they can explore things for themselves. And this is not an unusual comment. We have done this before. And some of the things that I'm driven by when I'm thinking about is the first principles, that David Merrill espoused some time ago. And I'm not going to go through this. I'll share these PowerPoint slides with you, and you can explore this in your own good time. And similarly about assessment guidelines. And let's not argue about theories of learning and teaching. Let's be focused by core principles. You can't argue that, take any one of these principles. Number one, teachers and learners are clear about the learning outcome. Everybody would agree that that is a good thing to do. So I'm not talking about mode. Irrespective of what mode you are in, what technology you use, we all believe that learning should be situated in a meaningful context, and so on and so on. Assessment is authentic, and so on and so on. But while we agree that these things are important, what I find missing is these principles embedded in the learning and teaching activities of institutions. So in this, in a couple more points, and then I'm stopping. Teaching is about the design of productive learning or educational experiences for the learners, whoever they are and whatever technology they use. Teaching is also a creative process, and one of my champions who has spoken a lot about this is Ken Robinson. If you haven't read his stuff, I encourage you to look at it. Teaching is also a creative process. There's a science of teaching, and then there's the art of teaching that I think we educators, pride ourselves. At the end of the day, if you're a good teacher, irrespective of what your mode might be, you are in the business of designing productive learning experiences. If that is in a nutshell what teaching is about, then teaching is a process of designing those experiences, and that helps you to think about teaching as the design science. Because then what are you as a teacher? Now, MIER's core business is the training of educators, the training of teachers, apart from a few other things I would assume from what I know. Pardon me if I've got you wrong. But we often don't think about teaching that way, as a design science. It's a science of the artificial, not the same way we look at biology, chemistry, or physics, but as an artificial science. And I'm not the first one to talk about these sorts of things. Design is at the heart of what good teachers do. Great teachers are good designers, and seeing teaching as a design science, therefore, makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, as Dr. Sharma was saying, I can't teach you content. I shouldn't be teaching content. What I should be doing is putting you into situations, into productive learning experiences where you are trying to make sense of the content with the help of the teacher, with the help of the tutor, with the help of the facilitator. And it's all about trying to, and this is the point of my title of my presentation, it is all trying to get the mixture right, and trying to bring three big areas of knowledge together. First is technology. And you said yourself, many of you speakers this morning said that, technology is here to stay, even in the developing world. 10 years ago, we didn't have mobile phones, but everybody on the streets in Delhi or Mumbai or Jammu will have a mobile phone. So technology is going to become available, and technology should feature in our lives, because technology will influence the way we go about our business. And the second thing is, of course, pedagogy. Pedagogy has to do with how human beings learn, how the human brain cognizes. And that hasn't changed for a very long time. So we know how humans learn. And then, of course, there is content. Nobody's saying content is not important. And again, I'm not the first one who's talking about these sorts of things. Mishra and Kohler have talked about this as what they call TPAC, the technological pedagogical content knowledge. So teaching is about living at the intersections of that. If a teacher today, in this day and age, doesn't have a reasonable understanding of technology, a reasonable understanding of pedagogy, and of course, a substantial understanding of content, then you can't be very productive. So every teacher needs to have a reasonable understanding of technology and pedagogy. You can't farm this out to other people. So what I'm saying is, the education of our academe, the training of our academia, all the professors around the country, if you think about it, the thousands of them, you think about them, how many of them have the balance right? How many of them have the balance between technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge right? I trust you, I bet you, many of them will know their content back to front, but few will know little about or anything about, or very much about pedagogy or technology. You can't be an effective teacher if you don't have a good grasp of all those three things. So seeing design as a science of the artificial and teaching as a design science is critical if you're in the education business. I'm not the first one who's talking about these sorts of things, and I'm just flashing some of the books here that have been written recently about design and about seeing teaching as a design science. So at the end of the day, I'd like to leave you with the thought that great teaching is about great designs, isn't it? If you think about your educational experience, the times when you learn best, when you learn most, were situations in which you were placed by teachers and who put you into those situations, and they were about great designs. So teaching is about making sure that students have learned, and the way that they are going to learn about something is by putting them in productive learning experiences and encouraging and motivating design. So one final thought then. So if you are running an educational organization, if you're a dean, you're a head of school, you're a vice chancellor, think about it. Let's not quibble about technology, because we can be distracted about little this and that, about AI, about ChatGPT, and so on and so on. But what should you think institutions should do if those technologies were to come on board? What would be different about them? How would they organize themselves? And how would key educational functions be designed? How would role and responsibility be organized? How would academic staff be appointed? Would you appoint academic staff if they don't have technological expertise or pedagogical expertise? You probably find it very difficult. How would academic staff have access to these professional development? What kinds of policy frameworks have to? How many institutions have policies around open, flexible learning or technology enhanced learning on the books? If they don't, then there's no point talking about these sorts of things, and more importantly, what would be different about these sorts of things? Anyway, as you can see, I've sort of rushed through these sorts of things only to highlight some of the important things that would make a contribution to the conversations that have been already going on. So I hope that I have made those contributions, and I look forward to a few questions from you. Thank you, Aditya.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Naidu, and for adhering to the time and rushing through your presentation, although we've got the essence of what you wanted to convey to us. If there are any questions, one or two, maybe we could take them now. And
Good afternoon, sir. I have a small question. How teaching as a design science builds pedagogical patterns for learning and technology?
I'm sorry, say that again. What?
Yeah, how teaching as a design science builds pedagogical patterns for learning and technology?
Yeah. As I said, there's two parts to this question. One is the science, and the other part is the art of it. And I think that if you go to one of the slides where I had the principles, the first principles, the 8 principles. If you follow those 8 principles, then that will help you design a productive learning experience. So that's the science of it. But the other part of it's a creative process, isn't it? Like every teacher is a designer, so that like somebody who designs a building, or somebody who designs a form, an architectural form, whatever it might be. There's a bit of art to it, and art comes with creativity. So I think you can't teach a teacher everything. You can teach the teacher the science of teaching, the science of cognition, how people learn, and the science of how technology works, but you can't teach a teacher the creative process. The creative process comes out from within, from intuition, from deduction, isn't it? So I think both those things have to be part of the teacher education programs of our universities, wherever they are.
Thank you, sir. I have one more question. How can we use this TPAC framework in the classroom? You have talked about the TPAC
Okay.
framework.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I mean, we keep asking these kinds of questions without changing our policies. Now, if I were a vice chancellor, I would change our policies on learning and teaching. Every institution will have a policy on learning and teaching. So if you look at the policies on learning and teaching or education at any college in India, have a look at the extent to which they deal with the integration of technology. You probably find not many of them are dealing with technology. What technology we should use? How should we use it? Who's going to support it? How is it going to be supported? You can't simply just expect teachers to use technology if they don't know how to use it, and there is no support systems. And most institutions will say, oh, we can't afford instructional designers, we can't afford video producers. And what's the point of talking about VR and AR and ChatGPT if there is no support for academic staff to use these sorts of things? So institutions have to put resources in place. And I know everybody's poor, money is tight, but unless you put these things in the policies of the university, it's not going to happen.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor Som. It was really a wonderful session. And again, thank you for adhering to the time. I know it's late evening in Melbourne, so please enjoy your evening. And thank you very much for connecting for today's conference. We look forward to many